Okay, so we're going to be talking about the um, display property, which I mentioned last time that you need this in order for you to be able to arrange the elements on a page to any side you want it to be. For example, last time we used this GG site, and as you can see, we have some element being placed side by side while some are placed on top of each other. So in order for you to do something like this, you need to know about display properties. And in CSS, we have this common value for your display property. So we have the display property, and the display property, the value you're going to be giving to it is going to be one of these that we have. A more to explain these two that we have here. Oh, all right. So we have these different value that you can use for display property, and we're going to talk about some of them, not everything I'm going to talk about here. Mostly this block inline, I will forget about this inline block because we're not going to be using that much, but you can look into it. But the one we're going to be focusing on mostly are this flex, mostly this flex, because all the element that you are seeing on this side, the arrangement follow that flex system, where you can use it to place content side by side, or you place them on top of each other there like that. But first, let's start with the basic one, which is this inline and block, because these are the most one that, if you remember, I talked about inline element and block element. So your p tag, your h1 to h6, and some other element, they are block, which means they stand on their own. They don't allow any content to come side by side with them. Even if the content is just one character, it will cover up that entire line. So that's what we call block. And we have the inline too, which is what is going on with all this button. As you can see, by default, buttons are inline. They only take up the space of the content that is inside them. So the content is just one item, then that's the space it's going to occupy there like that. And you can change from one display to another display. So all those elements that used to stay on their own behind the scene, as you can see, their display is what? Block. But for all those one that used to go side by side, you see that their display is not going to be block, it's going to be inline. But as you can see, what is using here is inline block, which is the same. Like what that inline block means is combining the work of inline and block together like that. But inline allows your content to be placed side by side. They occupy the content, like they occupy the space of the content that is inside that box. And you too, you can change any element from block to inline or inline to block by just using the display property. So to change the element display from whatever it is before, you just need to target the element and you give it whatever value. For example, this button now, we want to change the display from what the browser is using by default to block. And once this is changed to block, you see that each one of them will go to their own separate line. So block will not allow anything to go side by side with it. So this button now, even though the content is small, it's taking the entire line like that. Or you can use inline, which means they will only take the space of the content that is inside them like this. Or you can use inline block like this, which is still going to behave like inline, but it has some property of block. When you use inline or inline block, it's still going to be inline. The difference between inline and inline block is that it's taking some property from this block. And what are the properties taken? Anytime you use inline, you cannot apply margin top or margin bottom. You know, it's not the owner of that line, so there's no way to be detecting to the other element. So we can't just use our margin like this and just say 2 rem like that. So it will be doing some stuff that we don't want. Or let me even use the other element, because this browser now is not applying the stuff. But with inline block, then they have access to control whatever they want to do there. But I won't be using these two because they are kind of an old display property that you'll be using. Most of the time, what you use when you are working with your element, or when you want to arrange your element, or when you want to lay out the page. That's why we have this flex property that allows us to place things side by side or to place them on top of each other easily. But the way it works, you need to know container property, and we have the items property. So you need to know the difference between item and the uh, the container of those items. So if you are looking at it from this button, this box that is holding everything that I have here, so this div here, as you can see, is the one that is containing all this button here. So we call this one as a container. So any element that you display as flex, that element is going to be known as flex container, and every other element that is inside it that are directly under it, they are known as flex items. So here now, if you are displaying this div as flex, then all these buttons automatically they will turn to flex item. Why this one will turn to flex container? So one container can actually be item from to another one. So one container can be item to another container too, and that's the reason why you are going to see a lot of layout like this on the page, because of the way you want to arrange the content. So all this content that you are seeing here, all this one, they are placed inside a container. So that container is what we're going to display as flex. And when you display it as flex, then everything that is inside it, like the direct element here, they are going to turn into items. So for this one that we have here now, our div, in order for us to have flex, we need to display it as flex. And when you display it as flex, there's some stuff that go on with the flex, like all these properties that we're going to be changing later on, that makes things easier for us there. But the major thing here is that you need to know what is flex container and what is flex item. So any element that you display as flex, that's the container. It will turn to container, and whatever element that is inside it, they will turn to item. And these are some of the properties you can change on the container, and these are the ones you can change on the item. But the thing you need to know about container, all these properties, that is not really affecting the container, it's affecting all the items at once. Whatever property that you're applying from the container, like this direction, row, justify, whatever stuff, it will affect all the items at once. But when you are dealing with the item property, you are affecting each one of them. You are only focusing on a particular item. But for all this one, any property you apply from the container, it will affect all of them. You are not really doing anything with the container. It's just there to group them together. So whatever property you'll be using, it's affecting what is inside it, not that container itself. So it doesn't change the container, it only change the item. But when you're using this container property, it changes all of them. So all of them will get affected by this single property like that. And for all this one under the items, then each one of them you can use it to control the each one of the items. But we are only going to focus on the container property there, because for now you won't see much of the work on all this one. But by the time we started building something, then you will see them in action, where you need to change some of these items individually. But if you look at the page, you only see that they always have the same design. Most of the time, all the items always have the same design, and that's the reason why we're really going to focus on the container property, because once you just do it from the container, it will affect all of them at once. You don't need to start going to each one of them and talk to them one by one. But at some time, you want this one to have more space than the other one. That's where the item will now come in, because you only want to focus on a particular one, not all of them are like that. So that's where the items is going to come in. And as you can see on this page, there's a lot of flex property that is going on here. Now, by the time we talked about all this property, you two know how to arrange all these items, because if you look at it, all of them are placed side by side, but the spacing in between them is actually the spacing is different. If we go to other side too, like this free pick, you always see display of flex being used on the page. 90% of, or let me just say 70% of the time on any site, you always see flex being used because just like the name, flexible, like it allows you to change things anyhow you want. But the major thing is that it allows you to place things side by side or you place them on top of each other. Then when you now combine it together, you can have your grid there where you have row and column. But if it doesn't work on the two at once, you can only work on one side. So if you do like this, then that's the only thing you to focus on. Or if you change it like this is the only thing you to focus on. But when you need to focus on the two, that's where the grid comes in. So which means grid is just, taking more steps than what flex is doing because it allows you to change the row and the column at the same time. But with flex, you can only work with one. So if you are working with row, then it will not do anything with column again. It won't stack there. But if you still want to have row and column, you can mix multiple containers together to achieve the layout that you want. And you are going to see how to do all this info. First, you need to know each one of the property works like that and what's going on with the network. So let me check. So let me check. How does this disconnect? All right, loading. Let me wait for it. So that's it. Did not have what I'm looking for. It's still here. Look at it. The image is by this side, and this other content they are by the right hand side. So this is flex going on here, like that. So let's put them in. Let's see this in live. So the first thing we need to do, don't forget, you need to display the container as flex. And if you look at the page from the HTML, our arrangement here, I have this div, and inside the div, I have all these buttons. So I want all these buttons to be items, and I want this div to be the container. So since you want the div to be container, then you need to display it as a flex. So which I'm going to use this shortcut df because it's something you always do a lot. So VS Code have this shortcut to just type it because it's something you always use a lot because when you're dealing with layout, there's no way you'll be running from this flex. So since it's common, VS Code have this shortcut that you can just type and it's going to type it out for you, or you can just type it yourself. So but with VS Code, you can just type df and it will complete the stuff for you. The same thing with other CSS property too. There are shortcuts for all of them that you don't need to focus on right now. So once you display any element as a flex, don't forget all the direct element inside it will turn into item. So and save, you see that something actually changed on this container. Let me remove this margin so that we can see this in action. Can you see the way the button are being displayed now? It's quite different from the way it is before. Let me remove this display of flex. Can you see each one of them on their own? They are not being controlled by that container. But once you display container as flex, it will turn everything that is inside it to item. And as you can see, it applies some default CSS property. That's why you see. Is it that nothing is going to next line again? Before, because there is no space at that side, it moved the remaining one to next line. But now that we display as flex, now all the items, they are not like that again. Can you see what is going on? They are now going outside. Why is it doing like this? It's doing like that because of what this is known as this flex direction. So this flex direction is what you can use to change the way you want to lay out your element. Do you want all of them to be side by side like this, or you want them to be on top of each other? So this is what you can use to change the direction of the flex. And please, all these properties that you are seeing here, none of them will work if you are not displaying like as flex or grid. So they don't work on their own. There must be a container somewhere that you already have flex. If you don't have a display of flex, if you are using any one of these property, they will not work. They will not do anything because they are depending on this display of flex before they will start working there like that. So the first thing you need to do anytime you want to use any of this container property is to display flex first in the container. You can place it anywhere in that container, but there must be display flex somewhere in that container, which is what we have here. We already have our item or our container display as flex. But now, this is not how we want our item to be placed. We want them to be placed on top of each other instead of going to next line. So don't forget, any of the container property, you type them in the container, but it will be affecting the items. Whatever you are typing here, it doesn't affect that container. It only change the item that is inside it. And one of the container property we want to use right now is flex direction. And as you can see, you have different direction that you can use like that. Look at it. We have this button 1, button 2, and so forth like that. So now changing this direction to column, you see that it's not arranging them side by side again. It's now stacking them on top of each other. So if you look at this design here now, by looking at this, you already know that by using flex now, the direction here is going to be row because they are placed side by side. And what did I? And that's what is there by default. If you don't change the direction, what was actually there before is a row. So whether you type this in or you don't type it, this is what is there by default. And that's why you see that everything just go side by side. So when they are placed side by side, this is what we call direction of row because you only have one row. So when you have a multiple row, that's column like that. So that's how it works. So when you use column, then everything will be stacked on top of each other. So from like a vertical descent. So why the row is horizontal? So it will lay out everything in the horizontal axis, and for the column, everything in y axis like that. So yeah, this is how you can change the your direction. Apart from direction, which other property can we use? We have this flex wrap. As you can see what is going on here. So let me go back to row. This is where you are going to see the effect of that one. So as you can see that this thing will make sure that everything is on the same line by default because direction is row. But at some time, we want this thing to just move the remaining one that is going outside to next line. So instead of this, because right now when you just say row, everything will always be on that line. None of them will wrap to next line to, okay, since there is no space there again, let's just wrap to next line. And the reason why it's doing like that is because there is no space. If there is space, you see that the container is expanding, so it will always accommodate everything like this if there is enough space. But if there is no enough space, as you can see, they are cutting out. So how do you now talk to all those other one that is going outside of the container to just wrap to the next line? Like if there is no space, you just temporarily move to next line. But if there is space, go back to that single line. That's why you see that when you go to some site, you see that their card like this is like 2. But when you reduce your browser, you see that some of them will go to next line. So you can use this to achieve something like that. That's one way of doing it, but we have other ways of doing something like that. But this is one way by using this flex wrap. So, and as you can see, what is there by default is no wrap. So which means whatever direction you mention, that's the direction they must always follow. So whether that thing is going outside of it or not, just maintain that particular direction that we give to you. So if it is row that we mentioned, everything just go on one line. If it is column, everything just come here. Even if the height is not up to that, it will not try to move to the other side. I will show you for that one too, but the height of this one is adjusting right now, so it will keep expanding, but we are going to limit the height later on. Now save this stuff now, and as you can see, nothing is happening because that's what is here by default. But if you want it to wrap, then you can, instead of that, you just remove the no and leave it as wrap. So what this one will do is that if you see that anything is trying to go outside of that container, it will move it to the other space that is left in the container there like that. And as you can see now, so before button 3 will go outside. So since you see that button 3 will go outside, it's moved them to the next line. So it will keep arranging, but once you get here and you see that the next element cannot take that space, the next thing it will do is it will move. It depends on the content you have in your button. So if the button, this button 3 now, let me add that small content there. So instead of it to have this long one, let me just add small text there like this. So if there is a space for it to stay, it will stay. But if there is no, so you can see now 44 now, there is no way 44 will occupy this space. Because if you move 44 here, part of it will go outside. So what we do, it's wrap it to next line. That doesn't mean the 4 will always, 44 will always be there. It's just moving it, just like the way your texts are behaving. Like if there is no space, they will wrap to next. So that's what we are dealing with. This our flex too. So if there's not enough space, just go back to the direction where it's supposed to be. So if there is space, you see them side by side because we are using row. But if there is no space, once you see there is no space, it will move them to next line like that. So in case you need something like this, anytime you are maybe on a big screen, you want them to be like this. Then when there is no small, when you're on a small screen, just move the remaining stuff to next line. You always see this thing a lot in something like catch, where they are being placed side by side. And if you reduce your browser, you see some of them will move to another line because the space there is not enough for them to stay. So this is what you can use to make this happen when you are dealing with flex property there like that. So we have this flex wrap like that, but I'm not going to be using it because not every time that we need it. So let me just save it back so that we can continue with the other one. So we have this flex flow, which we don't really need right now. What we actually need here is supposed to be gap, but this flex flow, we are not going to be using it like that. We're not going to be using this flex flow. We're not flowing anything. Let it just stay the way it is. So what we actually need is gap. So what is gap? Gap is the spacing in between each one of the items. So whether there is enough space left in the parent or no space, you want to force a gap or spacing in between each item. Because if you look at it now, all of them just join together. But if you look at this one here, as you can see, there is this little gap in between them. So this spacing here is what we call gap. It will not add it here. So if you want it by the edge, you have to use padding from the parent. So it doesn't add to the edge. It only focus on the between element like that. So the spacing here, this is gap, and this is gap. But this one is not gap. This is padding, and this one too is padding. The one two at the top is padding. So it doesn't affect all those sides. The only thing we focus on is the in between each item, and it fills the space, whether there is space or no space. Whatever value you give to it, that's what is going to use as a gap in between each item. But when you are dealing with gap, we have two type of gap. We have the row and we have the column gap. But this gap is working for both of them at once. When you say gap, it's working for row and column. So you can give it row gap, and at the same time you can give it column gap. So when you do it like this, when you give it two value, this is what it's going to do. But when you give it one value, then it's going to apply it to all. So it's going to apply it to all like this. If you give it one value. So most of the time you only see me giving it one value. So which means whether there is row or column, will use the same value. But if you have different value for rows and column, you can specify the two of them, or you mention each one of them separately by just calling row gap directly, which is waste of typing because most of the time it's the same gap you want to use. But this one will only focus on row only. So the row gap like this, and again too we have the column gap. This one too will focus on the column only. So like this. But most of the time what we are going to be using is this normal gap like that, which we can quickly use here. So for example, gap, we just use 2rem, which is 32 pixels. So save, you see that it's going to put that space in between. It's not focusing on the edge, and this one is there is because of this padding that I use. If I remove this padding, as you can see, it's not focusing on the edge. It's only talking about in between each item. Even if there's no space in the parent, it will force it. It must have that. It will push them from each other based on the value that you use at this side. And that's what is going on here. If they are using flex, that's what you are going to use to put a space in between each one of the items that you have there like that. If you want to do it and they are not even, I don't know why their site is not using correct CSS value there, but if you want to do, they are using margin and they are talking to each one of them separately, which is kind of a waste of typing to me there like that. But if you look at this, let me check this site. Date. I hope it's going to show because this one, yeah, this will move into mobile because there is no space again. But let me expand it a little bit. So where's the element? Where are you? Okay, this is each one of the li. So this is the ul like this, and inside each one of them we have this li. Inside li, the there's too much of things that they are using here, which we can just do in a simple step, but because they have some items going on there, so like that. So we have the gap, which is really much. This one area, 2 rem is really much. So let me go to this 1 rem, which is going to give this small spacing. Let me add my padding again, like this, so that we can have enough. Or let me remove the padding, because we need to do some stuff with some other properties. So this is what we can do. And again, too, now if I change the direction to column, you see that it's so what is going on here, please? this is this is our row gap now. So this is row one, this is row two, row three. So the gap in between each row, that's your row gap. Why the gap in between? So let me change this thing back. So this is what we call column. This is column gap here. So, but because you are using gap, you know that it will just apply the same thing for the two of them. But yeah, if you just call row gap like this, can you see that it's not working? Because this is not the row. This is the column. So this is column one, column two, column three. So what is that the spaces? So here now you need to use column like that in order for you to see the stuff. But there's going to be a problem now if you now change this one to column. So if you change it to column, you know, you only talked about the other one, so it don't see roll again, and that's why most of the time you use gap, so that even when you change the direction, it will still be the same thing. The gap is not going to change at all. But if you need to change the gap, you can talk to each one of them separately, like that. So and that's why you only see in the code that they use gap most of the time, because you can change the direction based on the screen, and you still want this thing to maintain that same gap. Even if it doesn't need to maintain that same gap, you can change it later on by using media query. But for now, you want it to be the same thing, whether you're on row or in column. And again, to it to work, you know, before we talked about this thing, flex wrap, like that. So if you wrap it, you know that is now, so it will use your row. So this is the row. We only have one row gap here, which we can change. So the first one is for the row, the second one is for the column. So which means here, they are going to be this in there is going to be 3. Why only this one is just going to be the first value, as you can see. So the second one is for the column in case you need to use different value there. So you can specify the one for the row and the one for the column. But if they are the same value, and just type it once. So if you type it like this, it's just waste of typing, because if you give it one value, it will use it for the two of them like that. This one too will work, but it's just waste of typing like that. Just give it one and it will use that same value for the column too. So you don't need to mention, but if the value are different, then you can specify it like this, or you give it in this way. But I only prefer using gap because it's kind of flexible. I can quickly use one value or use two value, not that we're going to a different line to apply the gap in between the element. And later on, when we started with the design, let me see, under this training, like this, these are some of the UI we are going to be working on. We're going to start with this. Let me see, which one is that? Where is it? QR code. QR code. Where are you? Because that's what I normally start with a simple design. Yeah, so this is it. So if you look at it here now, this design, it follow what we want to use it for. If you look at it, we have this image and we have the text under it. So you can use flex now to place them on top of each other or to place them side by side. For example, now later on, after this simple one, we are going to go right into this other one, which is this. Look at this profile card now. You see that there is flex going on here, there. So let me bring it out. You see that some items they are placed on top of each other, while some are placed side by side. So there now, if you want to use flex, now you know that this is one item, even though there are multiple things inside it, but it's item to the one that is going to group them together. This is what I'm saying here. So we are going to have something like this. If you want to apply this one, so there's going to be a container here. Where's my So there's going to be a container here. Inside the container, this is one item, this is another item, and this is another item. So once you display this one as flex, it's so that it will place them side by side. But if you look at it, there is a space in between. That's your gap. That's how you'll be putting all this property together to have the UI that you want to work on. Again, to here, you can actually group these two together, where you are going to have the H1 or the heading text there, then this is your normal text. Then you can, normally they are going to be on top of each other, but in case you need to give them this kind of a spacing, you know, you need gap. Or if you don't want to use gap, you can actually use margin from here and it will gap from the down one. But I normally do it from the container, so that anytime I need to make any changes, I don't need to be going inside each one of them. I will just do that changes from the container, because you know that whatever property you apply from the container, it will affect all of them at once. Not that you start going inside each one of them to, or this one you have to talk to it to have the left, this one have to have left and right, this one will only have only the left. But instead of you doing that, just give the parent gap. It will do that for you automatically. You don't need to start giving the space or do any calculation on, is it the one that's supposed to be on the left or is supposed to be on the right. It will undo everything for you there like that. And that's why flex is really useful there like that. So the other one that we have under this side, which are very, very important, these two here, you're always going to use them a lot. They are really useful when you are dealing with the spacing inside the parent. So they are really useful when you are dealing with extra spacing that is inside the parent. Right now there is no more spacing, but I'm going to disable some of these buttons so that you can see this in action. So I will disable these other buttons so that we can see them, because if you put all this one, we don't have space, you won't see anything. It will be changing, but you won't see anything because it only depends on the spacing that is left in the container there. That I have 5 or 5 here, 5 is here too. So let me disable 5, because I want them to be just be on one line like that. And for this button, I'm going to remove all this. I'm just going to give it B1, B2, so that we can have enough space there, because there is not enough screen. So we need to reduce the text so that we can have what. So this one should be B3 so that we can know what each one of them is doing. So this one is going to be B4. So save it. As you can see now, we have enough space inside. The gap will not use all the space. It will only force the one that you want it to use. But at some time, you want to utilize every space that is inside the container. So that's where these two comes in. These justify content and align this. And the way they work too, it's kind of like crazy. They used to switch side based on the direction you are working with. So I'm going to talk about that too, because you need to know the direction you are working on for you to know which one is justify and which one is. But let me give you the height so that we can see some stuff. So this is going to be 300 pixels like this. Can you see what is going on? Can you see the way? So that's the reason why we need this justify and line. See what they are doing. They are taking, see that it take the entire space up and down. But we don't want it to be like this. What if you want it to be at the middle? Or you want them to be at the top? Or you want them to be down here? So that's where align and justify. But which one is align, which one is justify? It all depends on the direction you are working on there. And this is how it works. So what they do is that they uses the space that you have left in the parent. So if there is no space, you are not going to see any effect, because your eyes will not see that something is moving. So in order for you to see the effect, there must be space left. This is the container, and as you can see, all of them stop here. So this extra stuff that we have here is the space. So we want to distribute that space in between the 4 button that like that. So how do we utilize this thing, you need to know which direction you are working on for you to pick what is aligned and what is justified. So this is the way it's going to be when, where's my, let me use arrow. So when you are in row direction, so when you are dealing with row, this is your justify. Horizontal is your justify, while align is the vertical. When you are dealing with row, so anytime you use justify, it's talking about the horizontal, and align is talking about vertical. When you are dealing with row, that's how it work. When you are dealing with row, when you are dealing with row, so when you are dealing with row, which is what we have right now, so anytime we use justify, it will be, they are facing left and right. So justify will just be working on left and right, while align will be working on the top and bottom. But once you change the direction, to this, then the two of them too will switch side. When you are in column, align is horizontal, justify is vertical, because it has changed. The thing is like this before, you now rotate it like this, so the justify too will follow like this, and align will now come to the horizontal side. So this is how it works. So when you are dealing with direction of row, we have justify content and we have align items. When you are dealing with column, we have align items and we have justify the same content. Place and place, they work with the space that you have left. So they work with space that you have left. So they work with space that you have left. If there is no space, your eyes will not see that something is moving at all. So you will not see that the elements are moving. So you will not see that the elements are moving. So you will not see that the elements are moving, moving. So let's put them in use. Let's put them together and start using it. Yeah, so now, how do we distribute this space? So when you are dealing with justify content, since we are in a row, you know that horizontal is our justify. So justify content. So justify content have this different value that you can use, but the major one that you are going to use here is just center. So these are the major value you always use most of the time. Center, which is really this center. Then we have this flex end, we have this flex start, and this other one too. So when you are dealing with flex and you are using this justify content, we have center, we have flex end, we have flex start, and again we have this space around, space between, and space evenly. These are the one that you always use. They are like how many is that? That's 6. But majorly, the one you'll be using a lot is that center and this space between. This space around and space evenly. Most of the time, I don't use it like that because some most of the UI that these people give us, they follow this space between or the center. But there's some time you might need something like this. So for example, here now, you see that all the items, they are stacked to the left hand side of the this thing. That's what we call flex start. So the starting of your flex, but again too, this flex start and flex anything that has end and start is depending on this your direction too, whether it is being reversed or not. So let me explain that one first, because you can actually reverse your row or your column. Now when you say row right now, see that everything is stacked like this. But now if I change it to row reverse, you see that it will reverse the row. Everything on the left will now go to the right. That's what we call reverse. So if I save it now, it's still the same thing. What it's just doing is changing the So what it's just doing is changing. It's still row, but it has reversed the stuff. So instead of it to be by this side before, is now at the side. So left now will be this, or the start will be this, end will be this. Whenever your element is start by default, that's your start, and the opposite of it is the end. So which means the way start work here too is depending on whether you are reversing or you are not reversing that your direction. So if you just leave it as a row, then it's going to stay here. So let me see. Yeah, it's still going on. So what do we do like this? Yeah. So let me return this thing back. Move it to this side. So now let me remove the reverse and save. And once this thing go back, so this means that this is our start because that's where it's being placed by default. So we can now use this our justify content flex start, which is this the same thing as what is here by default. Wherever your element, when you display as a flex, wherever your element being placed, that's the starting point of it. So when you say flex start, you see the same thing as what is there before. So if it is reverse, this is our start. If it is not reverse, this is our start. So like your normal left and right, when you reverse, your start is right, and when you don't reverse, your start is left. So that's how it works. So if I save it, you will not see any change because it's still at the start position. But we can actually use flex end. So which means where you used to start, just go to the opposite side of it, like the end of that particular side. Since we are dealing with left and right, so since left is our start, it means right is going to be our end. Because this thing, the reason I'm doing this thing is because some of this property too is still what you'll be using with align. Where it's working with is just the whether you are dealing with horizontal or the vertical. So when you're dealing with vertical and it is not reverse, or when you're dealing with column and it is not reverse, you know, this is the start and this is the end. So that's how it works. So if you save it now, as you can see, it moves everything to the end. Without flex like this, you have to be talking to each one of the element one by one, and you have to calculate where does this one stop. Then based on where this one stop, you start the next one. Based on where this one too stop, you start the next one. Now imagine the element is more than this. You have to keep doing it one by one. But with flex, it will undo those calculations for you. Your own is just to give it which side you want it to go, and it will arrange all of them for you to the side that you mentioned there like that. As you can see, that's moved everything to the edge of the stuff like that. But what if I want them to be at the center? What it will do is that it will stay down the center and it keep expanding towards left or right. Flex start from the left, keep moving towards the right. Flex end, start from the right side and keep moving towards, because the more you add this item, the more it keep coming back, because it's it have to be at this side. But since you're adding more content, it keep going to the other side. And this is what I mean by that. If I add more C to this one, it will keep shifting this blue one to this side because we've added other content, because it must always stick to that right. But there is other items, so it will keep moving them like this. But I don't want this thing to add more to the list so that we can have other thing there. So now here we can use the center. So instead of it to stick to left or right, you be at the center and you keep expanding toward the two sides based on the number of content you have inside it. And that's what some of these sites used to use anytime, and it's always going to be at the center no matter the screen that you have. It to calculate the stuff for you. It's not depending on the current screen we have now. It's depending on the space or the container. So it will look at the container, then it will divide it into two, place the content at that center, and it's always there. Not that you'll be doing the calculation yourself. The browser will figure out everything automatically because we are using flex and it's flexible. It will always change based on the size of the container. So they depend on that container because they are using container to calculate everything. So if the container change, then the item too will get repositioned inside that container like that. Again, we have the other one that now distributes, not this one now, all the items are still going together, they are not being separated from each other. So if you said flex start, everything is by the starting point. Center, everything to center. Edge, everything to the edge. But what if you want to distribute the space in between the item? So that's where all this one comes in. All this space one here. So all this space around, space between, space evenly. So whatever space that is left, it will distribute it in between them like that, depending on the method that you use. So when you say space between, which is what you always use a lot, what this means is that there is no space at the edge. It works like gap, but just that it's using the space that is left in the parent. No gap used to force the space in between them, but this one doesn't force space. What it will do is that it will look at the space that is left in the container. That space that is left, that's what is going to distribute. But if it is gap, whether there is space or no space, that one we always put whatever you pass. You know, we do not pass any value here. We just say space between. So what space do you want to use? Whatever space that is left in the parent. So there is nothing at the edge. It will only put it in. That's why between, in between them. That's why it's focused on, not at the edge. So if you save now, as you can see, the B1 is here, and our B4 is by the other side. Then the remaining space, it will distribute it in between it, and it will be equal. The spacing will be equal. So the spacing you are seeing here is the same thing here. Is the same thing. If you have other item, it will still distribute that space. It will reduce the space because you must make sure that the same spacing that you have here must be here, must be here, must be here until it gets to the last one. There like that. So if I add more item, you see that I will be having small space there because it needs to make sure that the spacing is the same across. So now the spacing is reduced and it's still the same thing. It will always distribute it in between the item. But if there is no space, you will not see anything. So that's why I disable some of these elements so that you can see what is going on there. If there is no space, something is going on here. There's one element I generated one element wrongly here. So let me move this thing down. So if there is no space, you will not see anything because it's only depending on the space that is left there like that. So generate more like that. It will keep, but we said this thing should wrap. So it's doing some, the wrapping stuff too. It's affecting no space between. It will always put the space. It has already arranged all this one, but these two cannot accommodate those sides. So it's supposed to be here. Yes, it's because of the wrap that we have there. That's why can you see it's still there. So normally, if you don't do it like this, you can see they're supposed to be here. But because we said the remaining space that is left at that place should be in between them. So it will put that space in between them. So that's what it's just doing. But what if you don't want to just put the space in between them? You want it to be at the edge too. So that's where the other two comes in. But the way you do it is depending on whether you want the space to be the same thing or not. So when you say space evenly, so this one means if there's any space left, that space will be distributed on for the between. There is nothing at the edge. This one will make sure that there is space at the edge, in between, and the other edge that you have there. So, but I need to make sure that it's equal. The one you have here is the one you have there, and is the one you are going to have here too, like that. So, it will always make sure that these things are equal there. So, as you can see, it is between. There is nothing like at the edge, but because we are using evenly, it will make sure that the edge too is included. It will distribute at the edge. If it is between like this, there is nothing at the edge. But if it is evenly like this, everything will have space. So the start, in between, and all of the spacing will be equal. It will distribute everything equally. So it will make sure that spacing you have here will be the same thing for everything. So it will it will calculate all those in that, to calculate all the elements, place them where they are supposed to be, so that the spacing will be the same across like that. And when it says around, this one now, what it does that the spacing at the edge are equal, the one inside are equal. So what it will do is that the one that you are starting with and the end of the spacing will be the same. The inner one too will be the same, but they are not equal to the edge. The spacing at the edge will not be the same thing as what you have inside. But what's the amount of space? I don't know. It depends on whatever space you have left in the container. But the only thing that is sure there is that the spacing here and here will be the same. the one here, the one in between will be the same. But that doesn't mean the one in between and the edge will be the same. It's not, it doesn't care about that. But if you want it to use the same spacing across, just use your evenly. But what it will do is that this one here and this one will always be equal. And the one inside too will always be equal. But that doesn't mean the one inside will match the one outside. So if you save this one now, as you can see that we have less space. But what you have here is still the same thing as what we have here, which is not matching what you have inside. So it doesn't care. But it will make sure that the one at this edge here is the same thing at this edge. Then the remaining space that is left will be distributed in between the item. But there's a problem with this thing. The reason I don't use them is because they all normally do too much, because they depend on the space. So you see that that spacing too is increasing. If you go down, you see that the spacing is reducing. But most of the time when you are working, you want the spacing at the edge to always be the same. So that's why we normally use this space between, so that just use the one that used to change in between. So I will be the one that will control the one at the edge. How do you control it? That's where the padding comes in, because I know if I use padding, whether I reduce this in, it will always, or not, whether you reduce it or not, it will maintain that spacing that you want it to be. Not that the two will be changing, because it's depending on the spacing. As you can see, in between is changing, but the edge is not at all. You can do anything you want in between, I don't care, but that edge, I want it to be of this specific size. And if you use evenly or this, you use around, it will never give you the same thing, because you don't have control over it. It's being controlled by the spacing that is left in the container. If there is no spacing, they will work, but your eyes will not see that something is actually changing there like that. But it's actually working. But if there is no space, you will not see the movement, because there is no way they will move, since there is no space to use there like that. And everything we have here now, we can combine them together and use it to start building simple layout on a page. So the same thing that I just talked about is what every site is using here. So when you look at this site here now, if you want to build it, you need to know how to lay out your element. That's another thing you need to know. So if you want to build this one now, the first thing you need to know is that you need a container, because that is the container you display as flex. So which means here somewhere they have something that is wrapping all these elements together like this. So inside this place, what do they have now? They have this image here, which can be in its own box. Then apart from that, we have this container for this white area here, so which I'm going to use this black to represent. So this white area is another thing on its own. So when you now display this blue as flex, the image will be here and this one is going to be there. But if you look at it, you see that the image is taking more space than that one. That's what I talked about, that later on when we get to something like this, we are now going to be talking about the all this flex item property. So which means you want to be talking to them one by one. So we can use this flex to do that same thing that they are doing here. So flex, you can use it to talk to them. Okay, you take this much of space in the parent, so which you can use to proportionally divide that space in the parent. No, instead of them taking equal space, no, you take ×2 of this one, or you take ×3 of whatever this one will take in the parent. So if the parent is 300 pixels wide, you take 3, or you take 70% of that spacing. Then the remaining one, you take the rest. And that's what is going on here, because if you look at it, everything from year to year is always 100%. But we want this one to take around that 80 or so. So we can use, instead of you can use percentage too, but with flex, it's always good to use proportion or fraction. So it will do the calculation on its own. So you take like 3 and you take 1. So what this thing will do is that when you want to calculate the spacing or the width of this one, it will be since it's taking 3 there like that. So it's going to be whatever the number it have multiplied by the width. Now this one is 3 and this one is what? This one is 1. So that is 4. So this one will be 3/4 and this one will be 1/4. So this one will be 3/4 multiplied by whatever the space of the container, which is going to give you a bigger number. This one is going to be 1/4. So it will take the remaining stuff that's left. Because by the time you add the two of them together, they will turn to 1. So which is going to give you 100%. But instead of you doing all this calculation in your head, you just give the fraction and the browser will take care of the calculation for you. You don't need to be doing it by talking to them like, oh, you, and let's do the stuff there. Let's use one of them right now. So look at all the button. As you can see, all of them take equal number of space, but some of them too, if you have a content that is really big, they will not take, oh, they will really chance the other one. But you can use this property too to talk to them that no, even though you have more content than them, all of it should take equal number of spaces. Not that you, because you have big content, you should not take more than the other one. So let's put some of this property in action too, and we'll do the sample in the next class. Like we are going to create like a container, or let me see, or we can even use this as site, but we are not going to put this other content. We're only going to add the image and the white box. But we just say that something will come in later on. Even this one too, this is your flex too going on there, but there's a lot of one flex inside another flex inside another flex, then you will really achieve the layout that you want. So that's what you'll be doing with flex property there like that. So let me remove this spacing so that we can see some of this in action. Or we are not even done. We only deal with this justify content. So let's talk about align too, because if you look at it now, as you can see, all of them is just what is going on here. The value this one is using known as stretch. Stretch means just, as the container is moving, you to be stretching along with it. But you don't want this thing to be stretching anyhow, so we can use align, because we know align is dealing with vertical right now, since we are dealing with the direction of row. So we can use align. As you can see, it have the same property as that one, so it's follow the same. When you just say flex start, where's your start? By default everything's supposed to stick to the top because we did not reverse. But assuming you reverse now, it will come down. So if you save it now, as you can see, instead of them taking, just stretching out, it's now sticking to the start like that. But what is there before or by default is this stretch. So it will just like rubber to just drag the stuff to cover because of the height that I gave to the container. So whatever the height of the container, that's what is going to stretch to. So if it is 200, you can see it will always be to stretch the stuff based on that container. But if you don't want them to stretch like this, then you can change the value. So you can use flex start or flex end like this. So which means everything should just go to the end, but in the vertical axis, not the horizontal one. Or we can just say center, which is what I normally use. So, and this is what I normally use when you need to put something, at the center of a box. So to put something at the center, then you use your justify content center, then align item to center. It will make sure that it's always at the center of that container, which is something you can use when you have maybe a box or a circle and you want to move something to the center of it. This is what you do. You don't display it as flex, align to center, and justify to center. Don't forget the justify is going on the horizontal, while the align is dealing with vertical. So you vertically go to center, horizontal too go to center, and you see that everything will be perfectly centered inside that box. And if the box change, it will recalculate the value automatically because it's the browser that is handling it, not you. So it will do everything for you. And if it's just one content that we have inside it, you see that that thing will sit perfectly at the center. So, and if you put more content too, it will keep adjusting them so that they maintain that same structure that you want it. And that's why we normally use it for layout, because you want to move things in the parent to a specific side like that. So we have align to center, adjustment to center, and it's going to, don't forget, all this one doesn't force space. So they use space that's in there. But if you want to utilize the space that is in the parent, that's where space, then dash, whatever the around, between, or whatever stuff. But all this one will not force space, so they will just move to a specific location. If you need to force a space, then that's where the gap comes in. This one doesn't care whether there is space there or no space. It must always put this, whatever space you pass there, like this. So this is how it's work like that. But don't forget, this thing will change. For example, if I just say flex end like this, no, everything is end like this. So if you change the direction now to column, If you change the direction to column, whatever you used to do with justify before, that's what the align will now be doing. Whatever you used to do with align before, that's what justify will now start doing. Like that. So if you save now, as you can see, it's not different. Before it was down here, but since we've changed the direction, you know that align is talking about horizontal now, while justify is talking about vertical. So which means here now, justify with center, so which means vertically it will center the stuff, which is what it's doing. And for the other one, align now is working, and again too, it will change if you reverse it. So if you reverse this one too, it will switch the side. No, where it used to be end before will now be start, where it used to be start will now be end. So because you can reverse this one too, but I like that. And if you save the stuff, oh, what did I use? What's going on? Where is this one? So let me move this one back to where it is before. So this is flex end, and yeah, we have the end like that. So we've reversed the stuff. Coming, let me go to the row so that it can be clear, because this thing is in this thing here. Where did I have it? Align. Oh, I've changed it to row, so I need to use uh this one. So it should be flex end like this. So now the end is not displayed, but this is not what I want. I want column. So since I'm using column now, we need to use align. So just remove this one so that it can just stretch it. So reverse, you know that this is not the start. And if you use end like this, everything supposed to go. Now it have applied some other property here that I don't want it to do with this row like that. So what do I have here? I have allied item, so which is here. So flex end, which is going to take it to the end. Let me remove this one. This is what we have. So remove this. What is doing it is removing this stretch on this one, which is not what I want it to do. So this one should just be flex start, and it should be this is not what I want. So we have, let me move this into the side. So let me move it to this side. By default, when you don't have any of this one, it's going to go to the end because that's the start. If you don't reverse at all, it's going to be at the top, but we want to reverse it. And once you reverse, whatever that used to be at the top before will go down, and that's why we have B4 now starting. B1 is the last. So now that we have it like this, so our line here that we have, so we should start from there. Yes, so when it starts, we have everything here, but this is not what I want. I want them to be at the top. Since I want them to be at the top, justify content will be affecting that one. So what we need to do here is that the start is down. Don't forget we've reversed the stuff. So since we reverse, this is our start. So if you want it to be at the top, this one's supposed to be end. And once you save it like that, it will move it up. But I want everything to be by this side. So since I want it to be by this side, no, horizontal now is our align item. So since the align item, don't forget the start is going to be this, and the end is going to be, don't forget, the justify is the one controlling the normal size now, not the align again. So here if you use end, then it's going to take, this is what I want, not the downward that it was doing before. This is it. We have this justify, you have the column. When you have column, don't forget top and bottom now is not justify. And you know that since you reverse the stuff, if you don't do this one at all, it will be down automatically. But we want it to go up, so which means we need to use justify content to move it up, because now justify is talking about vertical and not horizontal again. The time it to talk about horizontal is when we have row. So that's when it will be talking about horizontal. But since we are not talking about horizontal, we are not talking about row, the column is this, and since the column is this, it means the justify too is working for this up and down. And since it's working for up and down, anywhere that is start before is now end, and anywhere that is end is now start. It is down here, but I want it to go up. So what I need to use is end, because this top again is not start, it's now the end based on the reverse here. If this reverse is not there, this is the start. As you can see, this is start. But when you have reverse, that's not the start again, this is now start. So in order for you to know, this is start, this is now end. Once you reverse, whatever you used to call start before, that's your end for the side that is controlling the elements that, like that. So that's how, or the side that you are focusing on, because you are focusing on the color right now, so it is up and down. So you reverse the stuff. But if it is row, we are focusing on left and right. So that's how it work. But before we call it a day, let's talk about some of these flex item property. So let's talk about some of the flex item. Then in the next class, we're going to use this one as in the next class, we're going to use this design as our case study there, like that. For look at what is going on here. We can actually put all this into, this is flex, but it's flex property we're going to use to do all this. But you see that this text is here and it's on top of this content. We can actually use background image for this in the container. Then the content is supposed to be down here. When you type any content, this is where they are going to be. But when you display the container as flex, you know that it will still be there. But since we know the justify and the align now, what we can just do is that, the one we need to use is align. So once we align it, what do we use? Flex end. It will just come down here instead of it to stay here. But assuming the text is by this side, what we just use is justify to the end and align to the end. Because align to the end will come down here, then justify to the end too will be here, like that. So we're going to use all this. This is the UI we're going to use for the case study. And again too, we progress through to this side too. We're going to add this side, but first we talk about the layout in general, and then we now can you see the same thing is what is going on. This is flex here. See that the Google logo is here, my image is here, then my two name is here. So I'm going to show you how to combine the element together so that you'll be able to use flex property to do something like this. So this is the button too. Inside button, you have the icon, you have the text, but you want them to be side by side. Look at the spacing in between it. No, that's our gap. So we display the button as flex, then we align to center, justify to center, because the two of them are the center. But it will not give them space, so we just apply the gap. That's just it. What you always use is flex property. Flex property, right now, is what you can use to do all this thing that is here. All of them that you are seeing here. Flex property is what you are going to use to design this layout like that easily without you doing too much of work. And that's going to be the case study for the next class there, like that. But before we get there, because this thing is now using the flex item property, because this image is taking more space than the other one, like that. So let me go back into the box and let me just add some lorem 10 here, just to add a bit more of text inside that one so that we can see what is going on. And if we go back there, can you see now, this one will push other one out of the way because it has more content than them, like that. So it will not just stay, or it will not occupy the same spacing as the other one. The reason why they are occupying the same spacing before is because they have the same number of text, be 1 2 3, this one to 1 2 3 text. But now this one is having more than what the other one is having, so it will just push them. And the reason they are coming to next line is because we use this flex wrap. But if you don't use wrap, as you can see, it will do something else. So it will make sure that this, but this one is not taking more than the other one. But I want them to have equal number of weights. So what you'll be thinking, okay, here now, what we can just do, let's come to them and just say the weight should just be 50% like this. And as you can see, each one of them will take half, but we don't work with the weight like this. Normally, flex actually come a way of doing it itself without you going to them. What if you want this one to take maybe like 70? Okay, what we can do is that let's select the first button. So group button, then we are going to have ends of type. Now I've started using all these CSS selectors, so I only want to select the first one. But you know, since I want to select the first one, instead of doing like this, we can just use first. We can just say first of type, because we know that that's the first one. It's the same thing at end of putting one there, like this. So what I want to do, let me give you background color of red, no, blue first, so that we know that we're actually targeting the stuff like that. So the color should be white, the border should be 1 pixel solid green, so that we see that we're actually targeting the stuff. So here now what I can do is to use width 70% like that. Can you see? It did not work. So that's why we don't normally use this width to control, because there are some constraints that go along with this thing. You can't just change the stuff anyhow like that. So instead of you using width, we can use this property known as this flex basis. This is the same thing as you just using width. Flex basis means what is the ID size that you want this thing to have, like what is the ID weight before it started growing or before it started shrinking. What is grow? Look at it here. So let me go down. Because there is no space, you see that, can you see the lorem and ipsum? Now let me expand. Can you see that the box are growing? And again, to where there is no space, they are shrinking. It can shrink and it can grow based on the space that you have in the container. So what's then the rate of shrinking and what's the rate of the grow? That's where this one comes in. Flex grow and flex shrink. So as they are shrinking, what's the rate? Do you want this thing to shrink faster? Like, do you want this thing to just go down more than the other one? Or you want it, anytime it is growing, you want it to grow faster than the other one? So you can use these two properties to control how this thing is going to grow, the factor you want to use for them. You know that they are growing equal, like the growing is the same. They are increasing the same and reducing the factor is using the same factor for all of them to grow or to shrink. But with this property, you can control the factor for the growth, and for this one, you can control the factor for the shrinking. Why this one flex basis? You can see that the width is changing. So before it started growing or before it started shrinking, what is the ID size that you want the thing to maintain? Like when the thing is not going to grow and it's not going, when we have enough space and it's not growing and it's not shrinking, what's the ID size? That's where the flex basis comes in. So the three of them together is what this flex is not there for. So this single one can change the three, just like gap, that you have row gap and color gap. So this single property here can change the three of them at once. So, and how do you use it? If you need to change only grow, just mention flex grow alone. If you need to change the string factor, just mention flex. But if you need to change these three of them, you can mention the three of them separately, or you can just use this single property to change them. But please, as you can see where I want to be applying them, you only apply them on the item, not on the container. So that's why they are item property. You use them on the item, not on the container there. So instead of us using this the same thing as this one, we can use some of these shortcuts from this flex. And one of the shortcuts is just using flex one. What does it mean? What it means is that the flex, can you see, the single property can change the grow, the string, and the basis. But it's not a must that you supply the basis. If you don't supply it, it's default to 0. So which means before it started growing or shrinking, it will firstly use 0, but it can actually grow more than that or shrink. So what does this one mean? When you use one for grow, it means all of them will grow proportional, like the same. So their growth factor is the same. So, or here we can just use flex grow of this one. So for example, I can just use flex grow of 3. The other one will be growing by 1. So anytime you increase, their increment is going to be by 1. But this one is going to be times 3 of the way those one are growing. So, but like that. So, but let me use flex grow so that it can be clear, because we are only focusing on grow. So like this. Again, too, when you just say flex, when you say string, the rate of the shrinking too will be times 3. That's the reason why I use flex before. But this one, we're only focusing on the grow part like that. Can you see now? So when they are growing, this one will grow 3 times the other one. Even we did not mention whether it's 50 or whatever, it will do the calculation automatically based on the space that is left in the parent. It will make sure that all this one, their growing factor is just 1, 1, 1. But this one is times 3 of each one of them. So the grow, you can control when it's growing. So if I expand, you see that it's always growing faster compared to the other one because it's times 3 like that. But as you can see, the shrinking, we did not talk about it. So they will shrink at the same rate. But the growing, that one will always be times 3 of them. So that's the flex, and which is the same thing you can see from here. That you see that is growing with this one here. So we can say this one is like growing like 3 times of this one in the parent. But instead of you using grow, because you want this to shrink based on the space that you have left, maybe you want, so instead of you doing like this, what we can just do is to use flex directly. So it will control both the grow and the shrink together. So this one too, just do it like this and save, and let us go to the stuff like that. See that this one is shrinking times 3 of that one, while when it is growing, it will grow like that. But it's not making sense like this, that is growing and it's going down by 3. That's why all this one, they are now more than it, because its own shrinking is down, which is not making sense. That's why I have to use flex grow that time, so that you see what is going on like that. But what we can just do here, what did I type? Something is wrong here. Like this, yeah. So like this. So now when it is growing, it's growing faster, and when it is shrinking, it shrink faster too, like that. But where you are going to see the effect of this thing is when we use 2 elements. No, that one too is 2 things that is there. No, this thing is like 4 items. So that's why. So B2, B3, and B4. But now we can just remove these 2. Okay, this B4 too is here. So let me move it to a separate line, and let me disable these 2 like this, so that we can now have that kind of a layout that is that. So this one, based on the spacing in the parent, it will always grow 3 times. Then when it's shrinking too, it will have to shrink faster to that one, and like that. So this one grow by 1 normal factor, like that. Or so as you can see, but it will shrink too, but it will shrink based on that stuff that we find. So we don't need to mention this thing on a separate line. Like, okay, flex grow 3, flex shrink 3. Just use flex. It will use it for the 2 of them at once. Or if they have separate value, you can actually pass them on that single line. So that's the shortcut property. So you can pass how it's going to grow and how it's going to shrink. Then if you need to give it like this size before it started growing or before it started shrinking, you can pass it as this one. This one means that, okay, when this thing is not actually growing or it's not shrinking, just use this. And when you use 0, it means that element will not grow. But at some time, you don't want the element to shrink at all. And you're going to see later on, because there's sometimes you give the element a specific width, but because the other item beside it want to push it away, so it will not shrink. And since it's not shrinking, it destroy the design that you want. So what you do is you now use flex shrink to be 0. Once you flex it to be 0, whatever width that you give to that element, that's what it will maintain. No other element beside it will push it. It will always maintain that side. But if you don't say flex shrink 0, by default all of them have 1 for strength. So which means when the other content want to take space, they have to shrink it so that they can get their own spacing. But when you just say no, don't take any space from me, you use flex shrink over 0. 0 means it's not shrinking at all. Or when you say grow 0, it means it will not grow. Whatever size you give to it, that's what is going to maintain. But this is what we just need in order for us to achieve this kind of a layout that is going on here. So this one will take times 3 of whatever this thing will take in the parent. So, and it will always calculate the stuff for you automatically based on the space that the container is having there. It's always going to grow times 3. This one is moving small because it's just 1. The grow rate is 1. Why this one will always be times 3 like that. But sometimes too, later on, there's some trick with this flex. You see that I'm giving all of them this flex property like that. So I gave all of them flex property, but if I want, I can remove this one and just give this one 1. So what this means is that every other one take their normal size, but the remaining space that is left, that's what this one will not take. But we'll talk more about that when we get to other design that requires stuff like that. But for now, this is how you can control the spacing from, you can see each item you are talking to them, not that you are talking to all of them. When you want to talk to all of them at once, container property. When you want to talk to each one of them, then that's where the item. But I skip one, which is this order. So you can use this order now to arrange the way we arrange them from HTML. The first one is always this B1. The second one is always this B2 and B3. But what if I want this this one to be at this, even though from the HTML, the way I arrange is like this, but I want this one to go to the end. So you can use order to control how. So you just specify the order according to your element. By default, all of them have order 0. So which means, 0 is always the first. So 0 will always come when you are counting. 0 is always the first. So if you give this one 1 now, maybe I just give it order 1. So let me give it order 1 like this. Order 1. It, even though it's this thing that is there, so if I save it, you see that this one is not coming first. Why is this one coming first? Even though I give this one 1, but it's not 1, it is 2. So why is it 1? It's because by default all of them have order 0. So if you don't give any one of them order, they are 0. So but anyone will not give order, it will take the order. And when they are order of 0, what CSS since all of them are order of 0, it will follow the way you arrange it from the HTML. But if you give one of them order like this, the one that you give order will go to where you mention it. Then every other one that you not give order will always be the first on the list. But if you want this one now to be where you want it to be, then you have to give it order too. So since we want it to be like that, so we can just give this one order 2 like that, which is the way it is before like that. This is just waste of typing because by default they have 0. So it will follow the way you arrange it from the HTML like that. But now imagine we have the other item that I disable. I did not disable this other one. No, it will make sense here. Now as you can see, this one is the first one now. So let me give this one maybe 2 like this. So save now. As you can see, is now the second one on the list. This one is here and so forth like that. So this is order 1, which is what is there before. But I don't want it to be order 1. I want it to be order 3. Even though you arrange them from the HTML like this, you can control where they are going to be in a container. That's why Flex is really, really powerful. Because with CSS, you can use it to change the way your elements are arranged in the HTML. But things you need to know is that we have Flex container and we have Flex item. And lastly, please, this one is not Flex item. So this one you are seeing here, like this, is not item to this div. It's not item to this div because it is nested under button. The only thing that will be item under this div are the one that you type directly under it. Any nested item, any nested element, they are not item under it. So whatever you are doing with this one now is this one that can control it. It's the button that can make this one to be item. This span can only be item under button. It can't be item under this div. So the reason is changing all this one is because we type them directly. As you can see, if you click on this button, you can see that from here, from the div, we get to the button. But if you go to the span, you see that something is in between from the div. So this div, can you see that something is in between them? So that means it's not item. When something is in between them, it's not item. And that's what we now give you the power to be able to put one flex inside another flex. So that was like the way I mentioned this one later on, that you need to put this, you need to display all this one as flex. But the flex of the container here will not be affecting the flex of this button here. It will only focus on what is inside it directly, not what is not direct, which is very important because of this thing. Because later on, the layout of this thing will determine the way you arrange this HTML will determine how the flex will work. It doesn't affect nested element. It only work on the element that is under it. Anything that is nested, it will not touch it. So if you need to do something with that, you have to go to its own parent too and display it as flex and do whatever you want. And based on that, you can do all this complex layout by using all these properties there. So that's going to be all for today. Stop.